the worst thing a wife could do is come to her husband and say, can you help me? And he's like, yeah, I think that we should take the video games and throw them away. And if you go, no, I don't want to do that. Then why are you asking him for his advice? You know, you have to honestly be going. And it's like a lot of women were like, I want my husband to lead. I want him to lead exactly the way that I want him to lead. Yeah. It's like, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. It's partially that abandonment of saying, you know, can you help me? Yes. Okay. I accept that suggestion.
All in this together. Family. We're taking a chance. Family, like birds of a feather.
Welcome to the podcast. We're so glad you joined us today. And because we give you what you want, the people want more of Katie. So we are, but actually something we're in the midst of our fall ministry survey. And I read some of the comments already, and people were like, we love questions. We love when you're responding to questions.
Really? I haven't even read the ministry survey yet. So that's a good reminder for everybody. Yeah. Do the survey.
Do the survey. We're actually reading them.
Yes.
Some of us are.
They're real people behind this ministry.
Yeah. But that actually is super helpful to know. And we are doing questions because, one, you send them in, and it's far easier responding to this via podcast than typing out a million
I thought you were going to
emails.
say it's far easier to respond to questions than actually write up a podcast.
Oh, well,
Which
that's
it is.
Sure.
If I could do questions all day, then I would be like, oh, that's so much easier than planning out a podcast.
So thank you for sending in your questions. And
yes, please send in more.
And thank you, Katie, for joining us.
You're welcome.
Well, before we get into the questions, I just want to say one thing, just a reminder. First
Only
of all,
one?
to do the survey, which is extremely helpful. We've had up to 700, 800 people in the past do it. It'd be cool if we got up to 1,000, because we use the survey a lot for
everything,
different appeals, for kind of planning. I mean, we use it a lot. So please take it. You can find it on our website. The other thing is family board meeting. We're doing our family board meeting course the first weekend in December. So if you've are listening to this
and we're listening,
and you've never done it, jump on that. So
so family board meeting course is available on the website.
Yep. That's all I have to say.
Amazing. Family board meeting is my favorite thing that you guys do.
Yeah.
I'm a little partial. Me and Jorge love it.
Yeah.
So
Good.
That's awesome.
everyone should do it. Okay. Yeah, because, you know, I don't listen to the podcast. I live the podcast. So family board meeting is one thing I actually do.
We're going to put that in quotes somewhere.
I'm just kidding. I know.
I don't listen to the podcast. I live the podcast.
I lived it.
Katie's like, I embody the podcast.
I gave you guys great content.
You
sure did.
You
You taught us everything we know.
All right.
All
Okay.
right. So
Enough about you.
Enough with me. All right. We'll get to our question. This first question we were talking about before we started. Then we're like, have we answered this before? And maybe we have, but it's everybody. I feel like if you've been fortunate, you know, to have a fertile family, you've asked this question of how many more babies. So.
Let's hear this latest situation.
Yes, this is from a woman who wrote into us. Okay, so she wanted some insight. Her husband are both late 30s. They have 4 children. Husband feels called for just one more, but the wife has just no desire to have more children at this moment. And she... Yeah, has a lot of...
Did she say how old her youngest was?
Yeah, so... No, she doesn't.
Okay, sorry.
Has a lot of things going on. Has had a lot of stressful things in her life. It sounds like her and her husband are converts. During COVID, it was really stressful. A lot of different things. She homeschools. And she also feels a charism to be a leader in the church and outside the home. Adding another child to her family just... gives her a lot of anxiety. She has a lot of anxiety over pregnancy and childbirth, managing all the sleepless nights and nursing while homeschooling. Oh, it's just very overwhelming, which I'm like, I know so many women who are in that position too.
Absolutely.
She just really feels need for peace in her life, but she doesn't want her husband to resent her, and she doesn't want to fall into sin of not being open to life. And so she just feels like she just can't. The whole thing is giving her anxiety. So... Thoughts.
Yeah, easy, right?
It's real.
Super easy.
Such an easy
Go ahead.
question.
It's so easy. I'll let you start. No, but I'll just say one thing first, and then I'll say more things later.
That's how this works.
One, the beauty of the church, right? When we are not contracepting, we are open to life, right? So it physically, that is we're saying we're disposing ourselves, putting ourselves under the protection of the church. So there is that natural desire that comes up in husbands and wives for each other, as well as potentially for children. But our desires aren't always keyed in. That's why it's vital that we have always the right behavior. So by living that way and practicing natural family planning, you can live with a great level of confidence in that.
You can have a lot of discernment, and then, hey, give yourself a glass of wine, a good movie, romantic night. 10 minutes later, you got a baby.
Yes, I know. I wasn't exact.
But it's true. That's what happens when you're open to life.
But it does mean that you're like essentially discerning every month. It's not a one and done.
Yes.
And God uses these natural designs to lead us on the path of life. Yeah. And I mean that figuratively and literally, right? Or spiritually and physically. Anyway, so I do think that we're in a safe space. So now we're just trying to get our heart right. And getting the heart right, I think there are two big issues that I heard. One is getting on the same page with your husband.
Yes.
And two is making sure that you both together are united and open to what God has. And sorry, I'm gonna just keep going on that for a second.
You said one things and then more things. Yeah. So that's what we're doing here.
And but so looking at that, what I really hear is that desire or the need for them to both get to a unified place. Yeah. God doesn't work in the division. And so I'm glad she's reaching out to us, and hopefully she's just kind of struggling with this on her own. But then for the two of them to get their heart right with God, because what I hear is a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of worry, concern. And what we need is a greater reliance on God, a greater ability to say, I trust you, Lord, in my life. And maybe it's looking back on our lives, looking for ways that we can grow in confidence that God the Father will provide for us and has in each of the times. Because when I would say to a mom who, and I won't name her specifically, but when I've said to a mom who's
Alicia. No, I'm just kidding.
No, when they just gave birth to her, hey, you ready for another one? That's like
Alicia.
the stupidest. That's like the
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's like the stupidest thing to say.
Right.
You've just gone through this big ordeal.
Insane.
And
Totally.
you want to give a little bit of perspective. And sometimes our life is so rocky, whether it be mental health or this financial or all transitions or things that are going on. It's like, okay, you know what? It's okay to recognize that we're going through a season. It is not good to say, I'm settling for this as a season permanently,
Right.
I think, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a need to look and say, how has God provided for me in the past? When we've had other kids, right? What did that look like? Reminding ourselves, because I don't know, but I'm going to count on the fact that if they have 4 kids, they weren't all pristine, perfect situations when they came forth. I look at our 10 kids, there were some babies that we were thrilled with and some that brought us to tears.
One of our friends who has 6 kids, she said, people ask me, how many of your kids were planned? She's like, 0, none,
Less than.
I never tried to get pregnant for any of these kids, but God gave them to me.
We actually are pretty good. We've actually used NFP to conceive.
Right.
Which people are like, wait, you don't know what you're doing with NFP. And I'm like, actually, we do. We could have had 23 kids by now.
True story, people. Yes. You don't have any pregnancies we avoided. All right. So first of all, and I just kind of want to echo, I'm not going to say anything very different than what Mike just said, but I just do want to empathize. Like, I have been there. I have felt that. I know you, Katie, have also felt that way of like, I just, when she says, I just can't. Yeah. Yes, I have felt that way. But the great news is that we don't have to live life based on our feelings and that God always provides. God always, always provides. And I think that you kind of said this, but that living out or making decisions out of fear or anxiety, that's not of God.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now, that is not of God. And also, there is no one I have ever met, or my mother says this all the time, no one she's ever met who said, you know what, we shouldn't have had that one more kid.
Right.
We had 4 kids. Oh my gosh, we had 5. We shouldn't have ever had the 5th. Never, ever. But there are so many people. I meet people who have literally strangers who have said to me, you know what, we should have had more kids. We had 2 and then we stopped. And I really regret it. There's a lot of people who say that. A lot of people who say that. And if this lady is 39, that window of opportunity to have children, that is closing super fast. I mean, it is more and more rare to have kids without any fertility drugs or anything, over the age of 40, you're not going to be able to have kids forever. Like you think it lasts forever. It does not. Yeah. It does not. And maybe it's because now I'm a grandmother and I'm older in my 50s, but looking back, I'm just so grateful. I am so grateful that we were open to life when we were, because God gave us all of these amazing children. Yeah. And it's not something I would have chosen. I'll be honest with you. In some ways, it's not something, I don't look at myself and be like, oh yeah, I want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and have lots of sleepless nights and all that. I wouldn't choose that, but I'm choosing life. I'm choosing God's plan. And then all of those other things kind of make me more of who God has created me to be. And the greatest good of marriage is not being a leader in your homeschool group. The greatest good of marriage is not serving in your parish. The greatest good of marriage is children. That is the greatest good that God gives us in this sacrament of marriage. And it's something to really consider. Am I saying I'm going to serve my community, and so therefore I'm going to forgo this greatest good that God calls? But and also to recognize you can do both. You can do both. You have another child. Hey, that kid's 4 years old, 5 years old. You brought another life into the world. And you're at 45, you still have a good 20 years ahead of you to do the things that God's calling you to do. So just all good things to consider. But the biggest thing, like you said, is being on the same page as your husband.
Yeah.
Because nobody should be resenting anybody else in the marriage in regards to children. That's not a good place to be at all.
And that is the way to discernment, right? For discerning decisions as a couple, you've got to be united in that. It's not one lording it over. Now, one of us may have more of an insight, maybe feel even more of a burden on certain topics, right? Really feel compelled. And we have to trust each other, right? We're not all going to have perfect knowledge, but the more that we can not strive to compromise, but to really build something new together, to really be heard as each individual. Like, I assume she has shared this with her husband. She hasn't. She needs to sit down and share these anxieties, share these concerns, so that her heart is open and that he can then honestly share without feeling like you're made to feel guilty in him sharing his desire for maybe another child, right? Being open to that.
And, I actually had a conversation with a group of women once about this. And I remember one of the women saying something to the effect of, what is in her life that she feels so unsupported that she can't have another child?
Right.
That is a very good question for her husband to consider in that conversation, because if she's feeling not safe, not supported, that's not, we shouldn't have children. That's no. That needs to be addressed with her husband and say, honey, let's put the whole idea of having a child aside for a second. And let's just talk about the fact that I feel overwhelmed right now, or I feel anxious and depressed right now,
and those and recognize and drawing that out, like even just putting it down on paper, like these are the concerns, this is the movements of my heart. Doesn't mean that they're all 100% accurate as you understand them, but putting them out there.
This is where I'm at,
and then you say, well, okay, when you're ready to, first you need to be heard, but then maybe you can problem solve. Maybe you can say, okay, well,
absolutely,
would a system like X really help and serve us? Because at the end of the day, mom will expend herself. Mom carries the burden of the child in the first 9 months and usually at least the next 9 months, right? And so for a dad, I mean, again, from a pure balance of who's carrying the burden, it is more of a burden on the woman. But recognizing that as a husband, I have put you in this place and
Yeah.
I want to do everything to bring you peace because like a financial decision, like if we wanted to go and make some investment in something, I'm looking at and saying, and we're looking at and saying, okay, well, in order to be free to buy a rental investment property, we have to have this much financial savings to be sure of that or whatever. Now that's on a financial level. We're not talking about finances. We're talking about peace in the home. We're talking about order. Money really shouldn't, unless there's a destitute, like really, real poor situation, money isn't a good option. But mental health challenges, physical health challenges, they're understandable, but some of them can be solved with creativity that comes from sharing as a couple.
Yeah.
All right.
I love that. It's a great answer. One thing that I like that you said that reminded me, during our marriage prep, Father Neil, shout out Father Neil from St. Catherine's, he told me, which just lifted so much weight, that it's a monthly discernment.
It is.
Because I feel like you think about it like this whole thing. I'm thinking about the next, I'm going to be pregnant for almost a year. Like all these things, it can seem so big, but it's like, no, like it's just every month. Okay. Cause maybe something will change and it just takes the weight. It's like, no, it's just an every month conversation.
Yes.
So I really appreciate that. I think that's important for everybody to remember. It lifts the weight. Okay. Next question. Marriage question. Okay, so I have a question for you about marriage. I'll just read the whole thing. It's a shorter question. But
Okay.
For context, I'm currently working with a Christian therapist for working through grief of an early miscarriage, and definitely see the need to continue to use this resource. During a session that was more about marriage rather than grief, she had told me that as a wife, I don't need to be everything for my husband, which I agree. That's Jesus' role. The part that I'm wrestling with is that she said that I don't need to be the person that my husband shares everything with emotionally. He shouldn't lie and withhold information, but he doesn't need to share everything with me, according to my therapist. I was taught and always believed that as spouses, there's a level of emotional exclusivity between us. Only the Lord and my husband have access to the deepest parts of my heart. What I share with my husband in an intimate, delicate way that I don't share with just anybody. After hearing my therapist's opinion about it all, it's left me confused. Am I wrong in my view? Would love to hear your thoughts. I find this very interesting because
I found this question when I read that question. I was like, ooh, that's good.
I love it. It's got some,
yes.
do you want me,
And
do you
we
want- do you
actually have
thought?
not talked about this, so I want you to go because I do have thoughts, but I want to know what you think.
So, so first thoughts here. One is there is a truth to emotional and physical chastity, right? Like that you don't just pour your heart out to anyone.
Yes.
And on a very simple level, like I talk to my kids about when they're in dating relationships, if it's not a very serious thing, even particularly for daughters, to not share their heart too quickly because your heart then gets entwined with another person more quickly. And then it becomes more quickly that you might be physically more intimate if you're emotionally intimate.
Yeah.
Right.
So there is a truth to that. And I remember there was a situation at work one time where I asked a female colleague, hey, could we go out to lunch? Wasn't thinking anything of it. And said, I have a rule that I don't go out one-on-one with, a member
Male
of the opposite.
colleagues.
And I'm like, note to self, that's a good habit, right?
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that I don't trust myself to have lunch with some woman, right? Or that Alicia is somehow doubting that, or but there is once you're in a married relationship, and this is where you can tell me if you disagree. I think once you enter into a married relationship, your best friends of the opposite sex really need to fall to the background. They need to that's not like if you have a.
I don't think that's what she's asking.
No, but let me answer. Okay. I do. But I think that's essential to know that there is a appropriate emotional chastity. So then you go to members of the same sex. I think it is vital for a good, healthy marriage that moms have other mom and girlfriends that they are connecting with, that they are sharing their hearts with, and hopefully some really tight sisters, even closer than just good friends, people that they can unburden their hearts. They don't, and then the reciprocal true, right? That men have good brothers that they can share. And It's more difficult for men to find those relationships or less common at the very least, right?
Yeah.
However, I do think that there are things that you shouldn't always share with your girlfriends or your guy friends.
Certainly.
Right.
Particularly related to your marriage. And something that, so anyway, so I don't know if that sets the stage where I do think there are things that would be wise. Like she's going to counseling.
But are there things that you don't tell your husband?
I think there are.
Is there things that a husband should not tell his wife or doesn't really need to tell his wife?
There are plenty of things that a husband does not need to tell his wife.
That's what she's asking, and I agree with that.
100%.
There are things in your heart that I'm like, I don't really need to know that.
Yeah. And
I don't.
And a perfect example is she's in therapy right now.
Yeah.
Your husband is not your therapist. Your husband is not your counselor. There are things that you might process and unpack with them that actually make it more effective for you to come home and to be the loving bride and wife and mom and all that other stuff, right? Because you have kind of unburdened part of it. And if we've already agreed that your husband can't be everything for you, then that almost kind of logically flows that, well, then if he can't be everything for you, that means you need other people in your lives. Like you're not meant to be on a little island with your family. That idea, I believe, is false and is not helpful for us, because it is not good for man to be alone, and it's not good for a family, meaning us as individuals. We need other people. And yes, we're made for a special communion, husband and wife, but we need more than just that, I believe, to be healthy in our marriage.
Well, you know what it makes me think of is when you started talking about emotional chastity. The question is, do you need chastity in marriage?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you do. Yes. Just when you get married, you need emotional and physical chastity with people outside of your marriage, but you need that emotional and physical chastity within marriage too. Yeah. So just think about it in the terms of physical chastity. It's not just like in marriage, all holds, whatever all the goes, time, right? Whatever. No, there are still boundaries. There's still boundaries within marriage of ways we control ourselves in order to fully give ourselves to each other. The same is true emotionally as well. I don't want Mike coming and just throwing up on me emotionally.
Yeah.
That's not helpful.
Right.
No, I want him to have himself in control, to be able to, even emotionally, to be able to give himself fully. And the same for me. It's not fair to him if I just come and just kind of just like use him as my dumping grounds or punching bag. Yeah. That's not right. No, I work out those things,
Sometimes
with my spiritual
mind,
director. In prayer, in my mind, with my spiritual director, with my counselor, whatever, with my mother, with my sisters, with my girlfriends. Sometimes you do need to kind of like work out those things. Kind of help me think this through. This is how I'm feeling right now about this. And then that means, it doesn't mean that you hide from your husband,
right? But
it doesn't mean that you need to just kind of like tell him everything.
Rely solely
And
on.
I also think that there are some things, especially in the heart of a man, that are very hard for women to understand. I feel like there are things in women's life that men maybe don't understand, but can accept. A woman can say something that he's just like listening to her and being like, I don't understand that, but okay. I don't think the opposite is true. Yeah. I really don't. I think there are some things in the heart of a man that if a woman heard, she wouldn't just be like, okay, I don't understand, but I accept it. She would be like, I'm a little like freaked out right now, or I do not understand this. Who are you? Because there is just something
it's an otherness.
There's an otherness there. And I think for some reason men are maybe the way that you're wired can compartmentalize, and maybe are a little bit more able to accept the intricacies of a woman. But because women are so emotional and relational, like when you tell me something, I want to like kind of take that into myself. But if it's something that is more aggressive or complicated or just really hard, I think that's harder. And I think there's things that are essential for men to have brothers to process. Because if you're struggling with pornography and you're telling me that, I'm just not going to be able to relate to that in the same way as another man.
And I was going to use that as an example. That's as a perfect example.
I'm sure there's other examples, but it's just the first one that came to my mind.
Because I've been in men's group, that there are I can count them on one hand, the amount of men who have not struggled with pornography, right? Where when saying that to a woman, particularly to a wife, it can be devastating. It can be earth shattering. And I'm not saying that,
or at the very least, she's just can't be as helpful.
She's not equipped, right?
She's not equipped.
And I'm not by any means saying to withhold or to lie, right?
Right.
However, that is not a burden you want to walk. Like if you are struggling,
that's what it is. It's the burden. I think that's what it is. Yeah.
I'll just use this since I'm already going down this road. But I'll just make this call out for any men, and I guess this could be women too, but it afflicts men much more. For any men who are struggling with pornography, yes, you might need to admit it to your wife, but you need a brother or brothers to help get you out of it. And I couldn't encourage you more to do something like Exodus 90, where you can have a band of brothers who are going to pray, support, walk with you to get you clean, sober, and out of that. You need somebody who's going to be able to say, I've been there, I've walked through it, and we can get to the other side, right? And you don't want to burden your wife with that. That's not her job. She's there to be your bride. She's your wife, your support, the mother of your children, right? So anyway,
the burden could be too much.
It's a big deal.
That's great.
Yeah. So it's
it
thank
sounds
you
kind
for
of sending in that question.
Yeah.
That's good. It's deep.
That is for sure.
So thanks for asking.
Okay, this is more practical, I think. So this question is, any suggestions for integrating an elderly parent into one's household with teenagers? We could use some quickly. Hopefully we get this back to her quickly. We're about to bring my elderly mother into our home. My elderly grandparents were in my home growing up. I was a little younger when this started. We've been listening to our teenage daughter. I'm not sure, but I'm sure there are some ideas out there, and we have a small house.
So I was interested in this question because my sister and her family are living with my parents, and they've been there for the past 2 years.
Has it been 2 years?
Yeah, I know. It's hard to believe.
Wow.
So my sister and her husband and 7 children live in my parents' home now. And so they're renovating
amazing
that.
And crazy.
Yes, it is amazing and crazy at the same time, which I think is intergenerational living. There is something about that I do want to say
100%.
that is the way that we were supposed to live.
Yes. Yeah.
This elderly people were supposed to spend the end of their days surrounded by
people who
love them and who are related to them and are of different ages.
Yeah.
Like that's the way that we're supposed to live. And it has to be done well, which I think this is why she's asking this question.
Yeah.
So she didn't mention that her elderly mother has any kind of limitations or illnesses or anything. And so I'm assuming that she's healthy. But just one little thing that I just discovered and I'll go to her question. One little thing I just discovered, which is absolutely fascinating, is everybody who's listened to the podcast, we've talked about Maria Montessori and her theories of development and approach to the child and her philosophy and all of that. Well, there is a whole area of study called Montessori for the elderly. And it is so beautiful because if you think about it, it's the beginning of life, the steps and stages at the beginning of life and how Montessori is used. And then it's like the end of life. Wow. It's like literally Montessori in reverse.
That's so cool.
One of my friends who owns a memory care center down in Georgia, Natalie, told me about it. And that's what they do at their memory care center. So there are books on it. I watched this video. It's amazing.
I should link to it.
I should link to this one video. It was so good. So if you have a older person in your life who is struggling with memory issues or anything, you have got to get into this Montessori for the elderly. It's the coolest thing ever.
That's so cool.
Anyway, but outside of that, assuming that grandma is, not at that place just yet, is not really elderly, but just older. One thing I know that Maria and Jake and my parents do, that's me moving this, is they do weekly meetings. That I really think is key, that the adults in the home sit down every week and they say, even if it's just having coffee or a glass of wine or something, maybe it's on a Sunday night, saying, hey, how are things going? What are your needs? What are our, it's just like you're meeting with roommates. So just think about that before you were married, you know, how you had to do that. Is there anything that we can do better? You can do better. Do you have any needs? You know, what are plans for the week? How can we help support each other? So that's one thing, is the weekly meetings. The other thing is just for the family to really make clear what their boundaries are. Boundaries as far as correcting children, how would they use of stuff? When can the parents ask the grandparent to pick up something at the store, to do chores at the last minute? Some people, because every personality is different, you know, like my mom's super flexible. Maria could walk in a room and be like, hey mom, can you go do this? My mom would be like, yep, sure, go. Some people just aren't like that. Some people are just, that's very stressful to be that way. So everybody's different, you know, so you have to kind of have that, know your mother or mother-in-law, and have good boundaries. And having good boundaries mean you need to speak those boundaries, you need to define those boundaries, and so you can live together. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go get the book Boundaries by Henry Cloud, read it, implement it.
Worth it.
Totally worth it. Totally worth it. Because there is something, like I said, that is so beautiful about intergenerational living. My grandmother lived with my parents until she passed away at 94, 95. And it's a beautiful way to end your life, being with your family. So anyway, I think it's a great question, because I think more people need to be thinking about that. I
think you did an excellent job. I just to emphasize again, just that need for intergenerational dependency, right? It's not just honoring your parents, which you ought to do, because there might be a need for assisted care and more care than you can provide. And so it may not be a permanent long-term solution depending on the health and the needs of the situation.
Right.
But if we can, I really believe it is in their best interest, and to be honest, in yours. Because when I think about the way that a little child helps shape a teenager, right? That little child helps impact that elderly person. And that elderly person also, you know, your parents actually help shape the conversation that's going on in your house in a good way. But again, like anything that comes into your house, you and your spouse, because it's coming from one side of the family. It's your wife or the husband's family coming in. Yeah. And so are there any holdover issues that need to be discussed? Are there things that that parent might be doing that is going to interrupt your family culture? They're going to interrupt your preferences, your mode, your routines. That is part of life.
That's life,
right? But so don't reject it for that. But recognize that there might need to be some adjustments, and sit down with your older kids. You talked about a meeting with your parents who are living with you. If you have teenagers, particularly, or preteens, they should be involved at least with you in the beginning, to say, hey, this is what we want to think this through, and we want to have that open channel of communication with you, so that you are being seen and heard. Because and this is true when there's I've talked to parents who, with a special needs child, that they can pour in a lot on and for that child. But they want to make sure, and they've always told me how they need to be very thoughtful and intentional about making sure they don't get the other kids don't get the short shrift or whatever, they don't get leftovers. And if there is a need for a parent, that is awesome, but it can't undermine. Ultimately, it can disrupt things for a little bit in a transition, but ultimately it needs to be a net positive for your family, and see it in that light. But you also can plan for that, right? Again, there are always struggles and there are always challenges, and if we see it from an eternal vantage point, I think we'll see something new. Meaning, let's not just say, "Oh, we're being very charitable by having them in our home." Yes, that's true, but there's also a gift that they are by the very dignity of being a human person. They have value and they have worth, and they can contribute something to your teenagers, preteens, your young children for their good, you know? And so all of that together can really build something beautiful in your family.
When you were talking about that, one thing I remembered is, first of all, just kind of coming off of what you said, everyone always has a purpose. Everyone can always contribute. Just like an 18-month-old can contribute to the household, a elderly person with advanced dementia can
Absolutely.
be contributing to the household. You know, there's lots of, go look up the Montessori things. They can be folding laundry. They can be scrubbing vegetables. They can be doing lots of things, right? They need to have
They can't
a
be
purpose.
just simply a guest in the house.
That's right. Everyone can contribute, and there's dignity in contributing. The other thing is that I remember when my grandma was living with my dad, who at the time was in his 70s, he actually experienced healing in his relationship with his mom, wounds that had been present since his childhood.
Wow.
By having his mother, still at 70, right? By having his mother living with them, he had some healing from some of those wounds. And the last thing I was thinking is that when you are taking care of your elderly parents, you are giving an example to your children of how to take care of you someday.
Yeah.
You are modeling, right? Your kids are always watching you, right? They are modeling. This is how we can be cared for, you know, someday. So just always keep that in mind.
All right. And what's the next question, Katie?
All right. So this next question is from a wife. She says, excuse me. She says, an issue that we have is communication.
An issue every couple has is communication. Yes, for sure.
All right.
I desperately want to be able to communicate with my husband, but every time I do, he sees it as a personal attack. He grew up in a family that always placed blame on him and heavily ridiculed him as a result. Anytime I try to bring up a subject on marriage or parenting, he immediately takes it as an attack on himself as a husband or as a father and doesn't hear the concern I'm trying to get across. He tends to bottle everything up, so I don't know if something is wrong, and then we'll reach a breaking point. One of these happened this weekend, and I'm really hurting and at a loss. I don't know what to do, as I don't feel safe to really speak to him without shutting down or taking it poorly.
Wow.
So, can I
Go for it.
Okay. So something that I can't remember if we talked about this on the podcast or not. I feel like we did not, but we did have the podcast that we just did about correcting your husband
Correcting your spouse.
Oh, I'm sorry, correcting your spouse. Hey, let's be honest. It's usually the women who do the correcting.
Bad idea.
Anyway, but in the point of the point of that podcast was that many times if we see our spouse doing things that we think are not good for them, not good for our family, whatever, it is very, very difficult to bring those things up and correct your spouse without putting yourself above them.
Yeah.
So one piece of advice that I would give to this lady is, now she says about bringing things up, and she didn't say directly that he was doing anything in their marriage. But if it was a conflict that they had with each other, and she felt like, you know what, I want to address this conflict. There was like a little snippiness or, you know, whatever, going back and forth. And he said something that really hurt her feelings, and she wants to bring that up to him. My advice to her would be to first take some time to think about that situation, really pray about it, and ask yourself, how can I take extreme ownership for my actions in that situation? Even if her husband overreacted, maybe he was 90% wrong on an objective stance in the situation. What can she take responsibility for herself? Maybe she brought up a subject that was triggering to him and she wasn't sensitive in the way that she brought it up. Maybe she wasn't thinking about him. She was just thinking about, you know, making dinner or whatever. I'm not even saying she's necessarily did anything that was maybe to the outsider objectively wrong or sinful. But taking extreme ownership means you look at the situation and you say, I want to own every single thing in this that is mine to own. And then to go to her husband and say, you know what? We had that conversation and I know you got really angry. I just want to ask your forgiveness for bringing up something in maybe an insensitive way. I really should have thought before I brought that up to you. It was a bad time. Do you forgive me? For her to take that extreme ownership and come to her husband in seeking that reconciliation, I think that's the way to go. Because then that automatically would help him to be more reflective. It kind of changes the dynamic, right, of the conversation and helps him to be more reflective. Maybe he won't ask for forgiveness for overreacting, but she can't do it because of that, because that's called manipulation, right? But she needs to honestly go, and she needs to, in her heart, forgive him for the ways that he has hurt her, thinking to herself, I know he loves me. I know he sacrifices for me every day. I know that he's having a hard time right now. I forgive him. I'm going to take ownership for what I can control. And then I would kind of like leave it at that, especially if he has a background which she acknowledges, which is very compassionate of her. If she acknowledges that, then that's an additional reason to just say, you know what? I'm going to give him some grace here and recognize that he just having a hard time because of these extenuating circumstances in his life, you know?
And I think that it's important just to kind of emphasize essentially what we're doing is we're starting with us. So if you came to me with a situation, a problem you're having with your spouse, we're going to give you advice for you, because
That's
you're
right.
the one who is looking at the situation.
You can't control your spouse.
So you need to just recognize that that's all that you can control. And what can you do? You can warm up the environment. You can make it attractive and inviting for him. Criticizing your husband, demanding of him, all these other things are actually going to probably do the opposite of what you're actually trying to accomplish. Because if you're saying, honey, just share with me, that makes me want to share less, because I'm feeling like pressured. And then, there's so many things that we can do, though, in a good way that warm the environment up. Because the first and number one thing particularly for a man to a woman, is to make her feel safe, emotionally safe to share her heart. Well, that is somewhat true for men as well, right? That we need to know that we're going to be loved and not criticized. That we're going to be respected. Because
you need to know that if I share my heart, she's still going to respect me.
Because when I share my opinion, when I share my thoughts, and you don't have to support everything he says and does and all of that, but are you having that disposition where he knows you admire him?
Yeah.
That you really extol him, that you respect him on a deep and personal level.
Right.
And that when that is communicated, that creates a safety, or safe place, if you will, for men to share their hearts. And when you open your heart to your husband,
right,
a husband's natural inclination is to protect.
Right.
And so if you share, like I'll use the example, right? And this isn't trying to, like you said, trying to manipulate your husband to do what you want. But if you are honest and saying, honey, I am at a loss at what to do with little Johnny, right? I feel like he's playing video games all the time. I try to get him to stop, but he doesn't seem to listen to me. And
can you help me?
Can you help me? And then it's
as opposed to, honey, you need to go talk to Johnny about the video games.
Haven't I brought this up to you before?
Right.
Haven't you heard? Don't you see what you're doing? Do you see how you're abandoning your son? And oh my gosh, there's a very different way of approaching this.
Yeah.
And be free. You're not asking him with a exclamation point, you're asking with a question mark, right? It's not even if you throw a question mark at the end of a statement, doesn't necessarily make it a question when you're like, no, I really need you to do this right now. Your husband is a free agent and needs to be treated with respect. And respect means you don't talk down to him. That means you don't order him to do something. That doesn't mean you demand the specific outcome, right? But you do bring burdens. You bring and say, hey, this is our family. And of course, you need to do that, right? You need to look and say, here's our child. This is what I'm seeing. Help me. What do you see with that? Inviting his advice, inviting his input, that is good.
And the thing is that you have to remember that if you ask for his advice and he gives it, you got to take it.
Because
honestly, because the worst thing a wife could do is come to her husband and say, can you help me? And he's like, yeah, I think that we should take the video games and throw them away. and you go, no, I don't want to do that, then why are you asking him for his advice? You know, you have to honestly be going. And it's like a lot of women were like, I want my husband to lead. I want him to lead exactly the way that I want him to lead. It's like, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. It's partially that abandonment of saying, you know, can you help me? Yes. Okay. I accept that suggestion because I'm going to acknowledge that, and maybe there's a back and forth. Maybe there's a refining of those ideas. And maybe for women, it's more of a reflecting of like, well, how do you think that would work? How do you think he'll react to that?
And that helps.
You know?
And if you do it, and again, it's a skill. And I'm not saying that what you're doing is necessarily wrong, right? But there are better ways to ask and then give freedom, because you need to leave that space for them to step in. The other part that I think I heard there was just maybe woundedness or issues of his past.
Sure.
And the only way you can do that is by loving him. And the more comfortable you are, the more comfortable he is. And this takes years and even decades for some people, right? It's in that relationship that wounds get brought out when there is, it doesn't mean he doesn't trust you. It doesn't mean that he doesn't feel safe, but it does mean that he's not ready right yet. And that's okay. We got to be patient with our spouses, that it will come in their time. And there's a difference between condescending or telling or nagging, and inviting and welcoming and being open to and leaving space, and giving freely.
And you know what? One little thing, a little prescription I would give to this wife is, especially if he grew up in a place that he was very criticized, start regularly keeping a gratitude journal. Every day, write down in a book the 3 things you're grateful about for your husband. Write those things down and then maybe share them with him on a date night, and do it over and over and over again. That is going to be like a healing balm, because he needs to know what a good husband he is, what a good man he is, what a good father he is, because I guarantee if he's grew up getting criticized, he's criticizing himself all the time.
And that's how marriage becomes a healing sacrament.
That's right. Right.
Praise God.
Last one.
Awesome. This last question is very insightful and kind of, I'm interested to hear what you guys say, like I am with all the questions. But okay, so this lady, so she, this listener, she said she started your first episode about parenting like a Catholic, and already listened to the second one and had some of my takeaways. But something that she's been continuing to come up in her life is parenting while encountering all of the cultural phenomena that go against church teaching.
Sure.
I listened
Like everything.
the entire world.
It's called living in the world.
So she said, I listened to your podcast on tough topics, and while I loved it, I felt like what is missing in this conversation is, first, the inevitability of encountering these kinds of things, whether in your family or in your community. Yes. And second, the call to love the world and evangelize the world that is so clear in the Gospels. Mm-hmm. I'm constantly wondering, how can I encounter souls and have zeal for them while also protecting my children? And what is it actually like to protect my children? I'm so curious about what the real life consequences of our choices with all of this will be, whether you hide from the world or your family because of these tough topics, or you counter them with prudence. If I decide not to go to a family gathering because of my transgender extended family, if I send my kid to an outdoor forest school, but there might be other ideas present in the kids or teachers, if I choose to homeschool, if I choose to never know when to let my kids encounter them, because they will eventually. Do you understand this kind of?
Yeah, sure.
So the answer is yes.
Yeah.
It's a pretty common.
Did you finish? I'm sorry.
Well, there's one last line. I don't know if whatever. I underlined it. But how do I make sure my kids aren't being exposed to these ideas prematurely?
Right.
So I guess it's timing. And if you do it, the
how do you not abandon the world? And I mean, really, that's the crux of the call of the disciple, is to be in the world but not of the world.
Yeah,
the family is called to be in the world but not of the world. And when you were, every single member who is baptized has a responsibility to evangelize. That is the universal call, both to holiness and a universal call to evangelize, to spread the good news. Why wouldn't we want to share that good news? And we can't do it if we're not in relationship with people. But the first people that you are exclusively is not the right word, you are primarily responsible for are your spouse and your children, right? That you have a moral and a sacramental responsibility for, that you will say, we are given these children to be good stewards of. How did we evangelize them? How did we form them? How did we steep them in truth, goodness, and beauty, so that they can be agents of God's good work in this world? That is the first and primary mission that you have as a parent.
So the way that I see this question is when we did our podcast a long time ago now on family culture, building your family culture. And we had the different levels of your family culture, or we'll call them like different like foundations, parts of your family culture that are all dependent upon one another, right? And so you have your spiritual life of your home, your marriage, relationship with your children, developing the gifts of your children, your home operations. And when all of that is working well, relatively well, of course, it's never perfect, but people feel cared for, seen, dinner's getting on the table, laundry's getting done, your family is basically at peace. That's your time when you can go and say, okay, we're ready to go out and evangelize. But the reality is that if your marriage is falling apart, your kids are falling apart, their gifts aren't being developed, and your house is a wreck. And I don't mean a wreck like messy. I mean like things are really out of order.
Yeah, disordered.
You should not be even thinking about evangelizing outside of your home, because that is not your primary calling. St. Alphonsus Liguori said, if I go and receive communion every day, I would be damned if parents would be damned if they neglected the care of their children.
He didn't say it to Alicia personally.
He did not say it to me personally. But he did. But I mean, that is a hard truth, is that as a married person, as a mother, your primary call is not, even though, like Mike just said, we're all called to evangelize, the first people you're to evangelize are those people within your home. And I know families that have a strong family culture and they're doing good and they do evangelize and they do bring people in. And again, some people may be listening to this and be like, well, then I'm never going to evangelize ever. That's not true. Maybe when you have maybe you have 5 kids under 7, that's a crazy time, but your life isn't going to be like that forever, and you're building a family culture. You're building hey, you have 5 kids, they're all teenagers, or you have kids spread out, some, whatever. And things are relatively peaceful, because it's always a struggle, right? It's always a balancing act. That's times when you can say, we are going to reach out to others. So second thing is talking about when is it developmentally, when would they be ready to be exposed to all of these different things like in the world. So I would really look at the developmental stages of the child, which we've talked about. I know that we've talked about, there's our age appropriate podcast, I think it's called, but there are certain areas of sensitivity in a child that you don't want to expose them to things at the wrong time. For example, you have a preteen who is just before adolescence, right? They're just becoming comfortable with their bodies. They're just kind of figuring out what is it like to be an adult? What's going on? That is a very sensitive time. That is not the time to be exposing them to your transgender cousin. Okay. It's bad time. Honestly, a 6-year-old, go for it. 6-year-old probably wouldn't even notice, they'll be like, whatever. And you just say, oh, what's going on there? You just say, oh, we just love them. It's fine. 18-year-olds, same thing. 18-year-old, they've already been through that transition. They have the body of a man, the body of a woman. They kind of know who they are. Again, maybe that's the right time. It's kind of a matter of knowing your child and knowing the sensitive time in their own development, where they're at, to make that choice of when. And also, some things just are going to come to them. Some things, like she said, I mean, honestly, one of the most painful things that can happen in the life of a child is divorce. It is. Your kids, anywhere, homeschool circles, Christian circles, doesn't matter. They're going to come across people who get divorced. I remember one of our kids, when they were like 8 years old, their soccer coach got divorced, and he was literally crying. My son was crying in the car, talking about how the soccer coach got divorced because his son was on the team. And so Mikey was talking with his son, and his little heart was broken. Yeah. And that he's a homeschooling kid just in a soccer league.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. And so I don't think we need to necessarily go seeking out things because they're going to come to our kids. And that's why that family culture is so important, is because when your children know what real love is, they know what real relationships are like. They know that mommy and daddy love each other and we're always going to be together and we will never leave each other. They're going to be able to encounter those difficult things and be able to handle them. You know, they'll be able to be like, okay, and it's not going to just totally, bulldoze them and think that, oh, marriage doesn't even matter at all. No, they'll think that if you get divorced, but if they're just coming, if they have that strong foundation, I think that you'll be able to kind of withstand that.
And something I think that's important in this, and there was the other question about like just feeling called to serve in the church and so forth. As lay Catholics, our primary space is in the world, and that where the church and the world meet is our home.
Yeah.
Right? And when when we invite in families into our home, we're exposing them to our goodness, the truth and beauty of our family.
Right.
That is our primary means by which we are called to evangelize. When you're out in the marketplace, when you're at work, that is a domain that only you, compared to like the priests or others, that's where you can be that light, right, at work.
We can sanctify the world.
And both the home and the work are things that all of us as adults are doing, right? Maybe there's a stay-at-home mom, right, or a stay-at-home dad for that matter, right? But in general, it's the work and our home. That's our primary place, and it's built on relationships. And then when we look at it and say, but before that, it's our kids. It's our marriage. And as you talk, it's like, but don't underestimate and think you're supposed to be going out and doing all these other things. This is your mission field.
Yeah.
This is your territory. And when we try to go out to this wide world out there, we diffuse all of our potency. But when we concentrate it and put that potency and say, my job is to be fully alive as a dad, fully alive as a mom in my house, so that my kids, that I'm not just, I'm multiplying, I'm trying to be fruitful. I want my family to have this intergenerational blessing, that I am not raising my kids to stay in the Catholic Church and just to go to church on Sunday. I want to raise them such that through my kids, my grandkids, and great-grandkids, all are on fire, passionate disciples of Jesus Christ. To me, that is a life work worthy of great story and song to be written about. So but then as we look at the challenges of the world coming on us, yes, that's going to come. Yeah. Like you said, we don't have to seek it out, but we have to make sure that we're the smart and not the naive parents.
Right.
We're looking at what's going on in the culture. So we're aware of what's happening in our kids' lives, and so that we can help them. Yeah. And then when we have the transgender relative or the divorced family member, whatever it might be, that we're loving them, and we have a whole podcast dedicated to that, but that we're loving them, and then we're helping form our kids so that they can be that light in the darkness of our world. That's really what our call is. And I mean, again, I think this is our last question, right? But just to kind of look at this and say, how can I be more fruitful? It is 100% by doubling down on your mission as a mom and a dad.
Right.
And then backing up from that is your role as a husband and wife. And then even before that, being the beloved son and daughter of God. When you live in that order of identity, putting first things first, great things happen. That's when our potency, that's when our power is unleashed in this world. That's what our world needs more than anything else.
Yeah. So when you think about like her question, it's really kind of both and, in the sense that, yes, you're supposed to evangelize, but first you need to, way we evangelize is by having this dynamic, attractive, beautiful family culture that affects our own children and then just automatically draws people in. Right. Catholic families have what the world is looking for.
Yeah.
Catholic families have what the whole world is looking for.
Love.
Yes, exactly. Love, belonging, identity, all of those things. And so you got to make sure you're doing that in your family first.
Yes.
And then that can grow. That's why what we are talking about living Catholic family life within the home, that's why it's so important. That's why it's so important. It's important for you, for your own personal vocation. It's important for your kids, but it's important for the world. It's important for the whole world that we have dynamic Catholic families because we have this great gift to share. Yeah. So it's like, yes, in your home, get that right so you can be a light to the nations.
So be charged up, be empowered. This is a great adventure. Right? And you were born for this.
Yes.
You were born for this moment.
Absolutely.
There's no one that can do what you can do.
That's right. That's right.
Hey, Katie.
You want to just close with a prayer? Thank you, Katie.
Thank you for being with us and
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the listeners who
sent them in.
Really appreciate that. And again, if you have time, take our fall survey. It might take you 5-10 minutes, but it really is super helpful for us. And so let's pray. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Heavenly Father, you have called us into this great and awesome vocation of marriage, this great mission to the family. Help us to be more effective as fathers and mothers, to step into our calling, knowing that you are going to fill in the gaps, and that you are going to help us, Lord. You provide us with a high calling, and you provide us the strength, the power, the grace to fulfill this mission in the world. May our families be strengthened so that we can be a light in this dark age. In your name we pray.
Amen.
Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. And until next time, may the Lord bless you. Thank you.
Family, we're taking a chance.